Welcome to video 4, Learning C# Fundamentals from Scratch. Again, I'm Alex Horton. Hopefully this video series picks up soon. If only this is only my 4th video. And what we're going to be talking about today is something that has to do with object-oriented programming. And so my disclaimer that I always say is, as you go down this particular video series, I am not the greatest developer in the world. I'm not the worst developer in the world. And if you want to learn something in a formal classroom environment, I'm not knocking that. I've done learning in a formal classroom environment myself, college grad. It's always a great way to learn. You can get one-on-one instruction and fundamentals and stuff like that. Obviously, there's no substitute for experience, but again, not knocking formal classroom teaching. But if you feel that you don't require it, then hopefully this is kind of a jump start. And as always, if you have comments, please keep them constructive and helpful. We're not here to down anybody or anything like that. Contribute, and we'll all help each other. So today, again, like I said, we're going to talk a little bit about object-oriented programming. Today, we're going to focus on inheritance. Object-oriented programming is a concept that has to do with programming, and it has different concepts that, object-oriented programming, let me say it that way, is a concept in development and in programming that help you create an application or a project in a much more organized manner. But there's some concepts that you have to understand that are part of object-oriented programming. And so there's 4 of them. And one of the ways that you can look at this is you can look at the acronym APIE, right? APIE. There's abstraction, polymorphism, inheritance, and encapsulation, I should say. Today, we're going to talk about inheritance. I personally believe that inheritance is probably the easiest concept to grasp. So we're going to talk about that first today. What is inheritance? Well, basically, inheritance means when you take a new object and create it, and it takes on the properties or traits of an existing object. What do I mean by that? You create a new class, and then you can inherit, the traits, the attributes, the properties of that class by deriving it. We'll talk about that in a minute. Inheritance allows you to inherit data from the parent object. It also promotes reusability of your logic. Means that you don't have to recreate the wheel. You create one master base class, or you create one master object, and it will inherit. It will allow you to reuse your code because of all of your data and all of your logic is inherited. Finally, it reduces development time as well because you don't have to recreate the wheel and everything comes through inheritance. So let's look at this real quick. So a base class is where your main logic would kind of go, right? All of your methods, all of your logic, and you want it to be something that you're willing to have be passed down as part of inheritance. You don't want to have stuff that your derived classes can do that your base class can do, and vice versa, right? You don't want stuff that your base class can do that you can pass on to derived classes. Let's look at it a different way. So parents are, in a sense, a base class. My wife and I were parents of 3 beautiful daughters, and they get traits from us as their parents because they are our children. What kind of traits do parents pass down to their children? They pass down ethnicity. They pass down their eye color. They can pass down their natural hair color. And obviously, those things are automatically passed down from parents to children. And then there's also other things that are passed down from parents to children genetically. Some diseases are passed down to children through their DNA. The male of a species, of the human race at least, his DNA will choose the gender of a child. And so there's different things that are passed down from parents to children, just naturally through what we call inheritance. I inherited my ethnicity, my eye color, and my hair color from my parents. Okay. So let's look at it. And the other thing about, inheritance is that you can have multiple children as a parent. Like I said, my wife and I, we have 3 girls, and all 3 are completely different from one another. And that's the beauty of inheritance, right? Is that when you inherit something in object-oriented programming or just in the natural world, no 2 children are the same, right? So I have, like I said, I have a 16-year-old, I have a 12-year-old who's going to be 13, and I've got a 2-year-old. And they're all completely different from one another, right? My 16-year-old is very organized as far as like schoolwork. My 13-year-old, soon to be 13-year-old, does not care much for school. She's more conceptual. And my 2-year-old is just a 2-year-old. She's a typical 2-year-old, right? And so the beauty of it is that, although I can pass certain traits, my wife and I, we can pass certain traits down to our children, they don't have to draw on all of those traits. Now, there's those traits that are always going to be passed down genetically, right? Those are things that you just can't fight. You can't fight genetics, right? If I'm short, then eventually one of my kids is going to be short. If my wife is taller, because she is taller than I am slightly, then one of our kids is going to be taller, right? So there are certain things that are always going to be passed down no matter what. And that's the cool thing about inheritance, is that there's things that may or may not get passed down, and every child, eventually, when they get older, there's traits that are passed down as well. Now, genetics is one thing, traits is another thing. There's mannerisms, there's things that I say, there's things that I do that our children can pick up on, but as they get older, they may not want to draw on those traits that they learned from me. Okay. So that's one of the beauties of inheritance, is that even though you can draw on that knowledge base or that skill set or that experience from your parents, as a child, you can mold that and change that into something that you want it to be. That's more polymorphism, but we'll get into that another time. So let's kind of look at a great example of this in action. Okay. And I don't mean by code. I am a huge Game of Thrones fan. A couple of my old co-workers, they introduced me to Game of Thrones. I didn't know what the big hubbub was, but they got me kind of hooked on it. And then my wife got hooked on it. And now we're getting other people hooked on it. But anyway, there's a great scene in that show where one of the main characters, Ned Stark, finds out, and this is spoilers for anybody that hasn't seen it yet, finds out that people are not who they're supposed to be, who they're said to be. The king of the Seven Kingdoms, Robert Baratheon, is a dark-haired fella. He's a dark-haired warrior kind of guy, right? And he's got 3 kids with a blonde-haired lady, and all of the kids have blonde hair. Now, the odds of that happening are slim to none for all of the kids that have blonde hair. At least one of them will come out with some dark hair, you would think. So, here we go. So, Jaime and Cersei Lannister. Okay, now I mentioned Robert Baratheon earlier. But if you've ever seen the show, you know that Jaime and Cersei Lannister are brother and sister. And these two have these 3 children, Joffrey, Tommen, and Myrcella, all with each other. Yes, it's incestuous. And that's part of the draw for some people of the show, right? And there's even a scene there where one of the main characters who's, finds out that that Jaime and Cersei Lannister had these 3 kids, and that means that these kids, especially the 2 boys, they're not true heirs to the kingdom. Okay, so Joffrey, and so you have these 2 parents, so they have traits that they pass down. So obviously they pass down physical traits. They're both blonde haired. They're both, they both have certain eye color. But there's other traits that they pass on. If you notice, all 3 of their kids are blonde haired, right? All 3 of them are blonde haired. But there's other traits that they pass down too, right? So Joffrey, little sucker, is a kid, or he becomes the king after Robert Baratheon dies, and what happens is that he's vindictive, he's sadistic, he's crazy. A lot like his mother. His mother's kind of the same way. She's vindictive, she's sadistic, and she's pretty crazy. Okay. Tommen is the second king after Joffrey dies. Spoilers. And Tommen is less, he's not vindictive at all. He's actually a pretty sweet kid, right? He's kind of innocent. He's kind of, I won't say nonsensical. That's not the word I'm looking for. He's naive. And a lot of people take advantage of him. He's a lot like his dad. Now, his father was very arrogant at first, but something happens to him throughout the show that makes him change his outlook on how he treats people. And he's not as arrogant as when you first meet him. And so, again, he passes a lot of those good traits down to Tommen and a lot of those good traits down to Myrcella, the daughter. Now, eventually, because of inheritance, Ned Stark, who's the Hand of the King, starts finding out. He starts doing some analysis, and he starts to look. He's like, well, Robert, my buddy, had dark hair, and none of these three kids have dark hair. I need to do something, which then costs Ned Stark his head. Long story short, again, inheritance passes down traits from a parent to a child. You don't have to call on all of those traits in a class, but they're all available to you. Okay. If you've never seen Game of Thrones, please go watch it. Then you know what I'm talking about. So one of the things that we're going to talk about today, again, is inheritance. So we're going to start our Visual Studio like we usually do, and we're going to create a class here, class library. And what we're going to call this class library is we're going to call this class library, we're going to call this project, let's call it Game of Thrones app. Okay. So create. And as our project creates, we know that there's other things that happen with inheritance that really assist others in using inheritance. And so let's kind of go back over that. Okay, so inheritance allows you to, again, inherit certain aspects from a parent class. Okay, now the .NET framework is built off of inheritance. Okay. Inheritance is a very strong thing. If you create a form app, the form app inherits from, or the form class that you create inherits from a base form class that is included in the .NET framework. Okay. And so on and so forth. So we're going to create a class. So as I usually do, I'm going to rename my class here, and we'll just call it Jaime. We'll call it Lannister. Okay, there we go. So, and then over here, we'll call this Lannister. There we go. Now, let's create our class. So we've got a class called Lannister. Okay. Now we're going to create some traits or some aspects of this class or some attributes of this class. Okay, so the first thing we're going to create, let's describe the Lannisters that we were talking about, right? Again, we're talking about Jaime and Cersei, so let's look at these two, Jaime and Cersei. Okay, well, what do they have in common? Well, let's look. Okay, so we know that they are, let's create a multi-line comment here. Okay, so Jaime and Cersei, we know that their blonde hair is blonde, and in the books they have certain eye color. I'll just say their eye color is blue. Eyes are blue. Okay, and so those are some physical traits of them, right? Let's say they're tall. Okay. And let's say one more trait about them as far as like a physical trait. Let's say let's leave it at that, right? So those are physical traits. Now let's do some other traits. Temperament. They're definitely both highbrow. They think they're more intelligent than everybody else, right? Wealth. They're rich because they're the heirs to a very rich kingdom. Even though Jaime is a Kingsguard, he's forsaken all of that kind of stuff because he took an oath. We know that's going to change eventually, hopefully. What else? Let's say, what else are they? Trustworthiness or integrity. Low. Okay. Now, let's create some members of this class by making actual variables. And we're going to make them public string, or let's do the shortcut here. In Visual Studio, you can do a shortcut. You can make a shortcut by saying either prop, if I want to make a property, or like that. That's an access modifier. So let's do this. Public string hair color equals blonde. And let's say public string eye color equals blue. Public int, no, string height is tall. And these are, we'll mark these as physical traits, right? And then we've got other traits. Let's say public string temperament equals eyebrow. Wealth. We'll make this a Boolean. We'll say this is Boolean is rich is true. And let's say public string integrity equals low. Okay, there we go. So this is the Jaime and Cersei class, right? They're the parents. Now we're ready to derive 3 classes from our parent class of Jaime and Cersei, right? So let's create a derived class. And we're going to call that first one Joffrey. All right. Now, in C#, the way that you inherit from one class, from a base class to another class, is by using a modifier of a simple colon, and then you type in the name of the class that you want to inherit from, like so. Okay. Now, all of the traits that you see here are available to me to pass down to Joffrey. Now, the way that these are set up right now, I can actually set traits of, I can actually set traits in this class, which I don't want to do, but we'll get into encapsulation later. I'm just trying to show you what kind of, kind of a low level of inheritance looks like. So to inherit from the parent class, you have to first, like I said, set up your modifier to be able to inherit from the parent class in your derived class. So this is your derived class. So we're going to mark this one as Joffrey Baratheon. We know he's a Lannister anyway, but so now we're ready to start making some similar traits from our parent class, but you'll notice as we start getting going on here, we could do this. We can do this all over again, but that's not the point, right? We want to inherit from the other class. So to do that, you first, like I said, you have to inherit, set up your inheritance, and then what you're going to do is you're going to instantiate a new object of the parent Lannister class, like so. Public traits. Public Lannister traits equals new Lannister, like that. Okay. Now what that gives us the ability to do is it gives us modifiers, so that way we can grab the information from the Lannister class and we can set the class, we can set variables in Joffrey from the Lannister class, like this. So instead of me typing blonde down here, all I really have to do is this. Delete that, and I can say traits. Oh, I can't do that there. I got to put that into a method. So I'll make a method, and I'll call this void Joff is born, because when he's born, he's gonna grab his traits from his parent. And now we'll say he's got hair color, and we can bring in traits dot hair color. And so now what's going to happen is what we have here as blonde, we've inherited from the parent class, and we're setting information in the parent class to information in this derived class. Okay, so this is the base class, and we can grab stuff from this base class and set it into our derived class. Okay, and we'll keep going. We'll do this with other variables, right? String I color equals traits I color, string height, and you'll notice that I can give them different names because I'm instantiating new variables based on objects from this previous class. I'm just grabbing the values. I'm inheriting values from this parent class, right? So let's see. Traits height is traits height. Now we're going to, so these are his physical traits. Now here's when we get into the difference of, even though you've inherited information from this class, you don't have to use this information in this class, right? So I'm going to get into his other traits. Anybody who's ever watched Game of Thrones knows that Joffrey was a nut job. So you notice that even though he's got a trait called temperament, his temperament, even though it's passed down, he doesn't take on, even though he's got that trait in him here because he's inheriting from his parents, he's different. He's different, okay? And he is nuts, right? There's an old saying that Tyrion Lannister says, murdered a few puppies today. So we know that he's crazy. We're going to make a Boolean. Is rich equals true, because he was rich. And his integrity is extremely low. You know, he lied about getting his tail kicked by Arya Stark. So here we go. We've got Joffrey Baratheon, aka Lannister. And he's got a class. So this is our first derived class from Jaime and Cersei. Now what we can do is we can just copy this class and we'll paste this class in here and we'll make the next one. Tommen. And we'll just call this method Tommen is born. Okay, he also, Tommen, he also inherits from Cersei and Jaime as well. His eye color, his hair color, his height, they are all the same as his parents and his brother. But his temperament is different. He's actually a pretty kind-hearted kid. He's kind-hearted and naive. He's very rich, obviously. And his integrity is moderate. Okay. We're also going to make another attribute of Tommen that the others don't share, right? And we're gonna make it a bull. Bull was taken. Was taken advantage of equals true. Okay. So again, we see that even though these two classes have inherited from this main class, that they are different from one another. We can also see that there's variables here that we can create in our derived classes that have nothing to do with our parent class or our base class, right? Let's make one more class here. We're going to make Myrcella. Okay. Like her brothers before her and her parents, she gets all the same physical traits. Her temperament is kind-hearted. Well, I'll say she's selfish. And say she's a little bit selfish but sweet. She's rich. Her integrity is moderate to low because she knew who her parents were. The other ones didn't, even though Joffrey had an idea. And then finally, was she taking advantage of? Yep. And we'll actually make one more trait here for Joffrey. We'll say Boolean was a nut job. Yes. Oh, true. Right? So we've got 3 derived classes that inherit from our parent class. And we see where we can pull traits from or attributes or properties from this particular class, and we can pass those properties down to our derived classes. So this is our base class, and these are our derived classes. And so because of that, it allows us, as you saw, and I was just copying and pasting, it allows us to speed up our development quite a bit. And the more that you decide that you're going to put in your base class, the more you can pass down to derived classes. Now, just a word of caution, and we'll get into this later in encapsulation, is that you have to be careful of what you're passing down, because if you're making errors in logic in your base class, again, those errors are going to be passed down to your derived classes as well, right? So, for example, in the sense of Cersei Lannister, she's a nut job. She's cunning and she's crazy. She ain't stupid. I'll say it that way. And she passed that down off to Joffrey and started a whole mess when he did what he did, right? And so eventually, though, like I said, you can tell that they're all related to one another. They have very common traits and they have very common characteristics. And that's the purpose of having a base class and derived classes, is that your base class stores common traits that you can use amongst plenty of other derived classes. Okay. And so this is an example of of inheritance. And like before, as I end this video, just keep in mind that, again, I am not a teacher or professor or anything like that. If you have any questions or concerns, please comment. I would hope that you subscribe and like, or if you want to dislike, that's fine too, but let's keep it constructive and let's help one another to learn this. So again, this was inheritance at the class level. And as we see, that's how kind of inheritance works at a very high level. Again, my name is Alex, and I hope you like this again. And watch Game of Thrones this Sunday, April 14th. If you see this video before then, last season, get caught up if you haven't been caught up. And then finally, as always, I hope this finds you well. I hope that you enjoy this, and God bless.